welcome back to the Found in Translation Talk Show. This is host Ray Collazo. Thank you for watching live and vivo on Facebook, Twitter, or listening on WPPMLP 106.5 FM in Philadelphia, and anywhere, and I mean anywhere, you can download a podcast. Found in Translation stacks truth about politics and today's news headlines, and is the longest running, I'm proud to say, the longest running Latino-led political talk podcast out there. And if you don't believe me, Google it. This is Jose Ray Collazo. Let's welcome my producer and co-host and the founder of the Que Lo Que podcast, Elbert Garcia. Buenas noches, hermanito. What's going on?
Buenas noches, man. How's it going, Ray? Great to be here today on another Thursday. Lots going on.
Been an incredible week. We're going to get into a Ray's Where's Ray segment later. We had some interesting journeys as we do on the Found in Translation journey, but coast to coast, man, there's so much going on. We have later on in the show, we're going to get into some political bochinche coast to coast.
Well, yeah,
I got a lot of spies, dog, up in here.
You got a lot
to talk about today.
I know you're gonna drop some real serious jewels, man, on your adventures this week. Before you can do that, I want to just let everybody know you can join the conversation by submitting your questions or observations in the comment section down to the Facebook or replying on Twitter. We'll also in a couple of minutes flash the link that you guys can also click to participate in. And so I'm going to put that in the comment section in a couple of seconds. And later on in the show, I know, Ray, you're going to break down some important news headlines and political bochinche, you were saying, folks who just joined in. And later on in the show, we're going to also be joined by Cornell Professor Dr. Jaime, who's going to talk to us about the ongoing drama that's going on impacting Harvard's Latino faculty and students. But first, man, Ray, we got to get your thoughts on the sudden news that Senator Kamala Harris has dropped out of the presidential Democratic primary race. Now, she was a top tier candidate until recently, seemingly a couple of weeks ago, right? We were just talking about her, but quickly lost momentum in the polls and the public perception after a series of hit pieces, I would say, on her campaign organization. Ray, folks want to hear from you about ¿Qué pasó con Kamala, man? First, what's your reaction, man, to the news?
Well, the first thing is I want to let people know, kind of set the stage for how I heard about it. And so we're going to get into the exact setting later in the Dengue Bochinche segment, because we're going to find out where Ray was this week. But needless to say, I was around basically 100 of the top Democratic activists around the country at the moment I heard it. And there was, and I'd say about a quarter of the group was Black females, some of the great leaders of the party and of our country. And the overwhelming sense that we had was, first of all, this shock. I mean, nobody expected her to drop out, even amongst the political insiders that we know. This was a shock to everyone, unless you were part of the very inner circle of the Harris campaign. And the thing I found was sadness. That was my initial reaction, that, how much further we have to go. I mean, thinking about the voice we're not going to have in the upcoming debates and in the rest of this campaign that Senator Harris brought to the table. And very much analogous to the feelings that I had, and many of us had, when Julian Castro was not part of the last debate. There's going to be something missing for her not being part of this process moving forward. And it's disappointing that not only as a Black female, a very strong candidate, also an Asian American woman, that she's not going to be able to collect delegates and sort of build more leverage for her platform moving forward. So that's really the first thing, was an emotional thing. And I share that with a lot of folks that I was around and talking to the last few days, particularly our Black women, that even if she wasn't their preferred candidate or our preferred candidate or my preferred candidate, she brings a lot to the table, and we want her to be part of the process. And it just shows, as far as our country's gone with issues around diversity, as far as our country's gone around democratic politics, and someone that could be a top tier candidate like Senator Harris, that we have a long way to go.
Ray, what do you think, was a function of having a sloppy campaign, or do you think, as some people have said, even Julio Castro, I think, have made some comments about whether, she was kind of graded on an unfair curve, especially as a Black female candidate. What's your thoughts?
It's a combination of both. And I think we've chronicled it, pretty extensively on the show here on Found in Translation. Again, we really appreciate people joining us and because we have a lot of very important information to share with you all about what's going on in our country and in our politics and in our news. But that, I think there was just two critical factors I think that really hindered her. One was she never really kind of stuck to the message. She really sort of went into the campaign sort of touting herself as sort of a more attractive political persona than the lefties. But then that didn't really play into her strengths, which is her background as a prosecutor, Attorney General of California. She did a lot of human and civil rights work and fighting for the common, working people in that role. And she didn't build her campaign on that. She was counterpunching and sort of trying to play off people and positioning herself. And I think, when I heard her once in the middle of the campaign say that raising teacher pay was one of her number one issues, I mean, that's a wonderful thing. And I want our teachers to get paid well, but she doesn't have an education background and it just didn't fit with her ethos. And then when she had to fight on grounds that she doesn't have a lot of background on, like healthcare, then she was very fungible, right? And then I think strategically, this idea that, okay, I'm a black female, I'm impressive, I have this great personality, I have this, sort of Obama-esque persona that as long as I can just sort of hang in, I'll clean up in South Carolina, and then I got California. And it doesn't work that way. You have to show your viability. Remember, at this time in 2007, Obama was not doing very well, and he had Michelle with him in South Carolina. Black voters were very still of her viability. So, and I think the thing that, well, we'll get into it in a second, but I think California and what the polls were looking like and the dynamics related to that California primary on Super Tuesday were a big factor, and we can get more into that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I was wondering, that was part of what I was thinking about, because I was thinking like, why now, right? I mean, I think, and look, a presidential campaign, a lot of ways, is almost like starting a business, right? They always tell you, like, if you can survive those first couple of years, those lean years, and you can get to it, then you can kind of like not cash in, you can kind of cash in when the opportunity, meets what you've built up, right? And the question is like, why really now? I mean, you have Super Tuesday coming in, you have the California and the Nevada races. If she could just have held on to there, right? Some thought, theory might have been she could have at least, made a huge, at least much more impact. She could also just be making a lot of impact in terms of her, in terms of her discussion on the issues, right? So why now?
Yeah, no, well, I draw a lot of, I'm a big sports fan, as you know, and I draw a lot of boxing analogies with these situations. And I see boxers that either because they have nothing to lose, they don't have the sort of high-end pedigree, they're not signed one of the major promoters, or they just have a certain, I don't give an F kind of style, that they'll take any fight, anywhere, anytime. Thinking about my man Ruiz, who's going to take on another great challenge, Anthony Joshua, this weekend. Much respect to our homie, the great Mexican-American heavyweight champion. He'll take an L. If he got to, he'll take an L. He don't got no care for it because, hey, he's got a certain personality and he's got nothing to lose in that sense. And then there's boxers that are very careful and very strategic about their careers. They tend to fight people when they're a little past their prime. They tend to fight them when they're, kind of a little lighter than them, and I think of that in Kamala's situation. I think in Kamala's situation, someone that's not only thinking about 2020, but thinking about 2024 and beyond, someone has a fantastic political future, someone that we hope and would work hard to be president one day, didn't want to take that on California. And I think she not only saw that it wasn't going to go well for her in Iowa, New Hampshire, not even, and South Carolina at that point would have been up in the air for sure. But the idea of, after all of this branding, all of this platform, after a year plus, you end up finishing third in your home state. And I don't know if y'all saw, Bernie Sanders is moving up in polls in California, particularly in the Latino community. She would not want to take that L in her home state and lose not only to the old timer, but lose because the biggest minority voting bloc in her state that she needs for her own reelections, if she wants to run for Senate or governor in the future, is not with her. So I think not wanting to take that L in Cali ultimately was the reason she dropped out now to cut her losses.
Right. As we continue to figure this out, I mean, like, every time in sports analogies, there's always like, well, what's the ripple effect, right? Like, what's the reverberations? What do you think? What do you see? Who, by this exit, who stands to win, and who comes out a winner out of this, and who comes out a little more damaged? Well,
let's talk about the biggest losers, which is minority voters. And so we have now a situation where, although you could argue give Senator Booker, and even to a lesser degree, someone who I've personally endorsed, but at this point, it's certainly a long shot in Secretary Castro. it gives them more of an opening, and it gives Booker a theory of the case. Hey, we've got to have at least one, Black or Latino in the mix. Yang is not only Asian American, but just sort of has a different ethos around sort of how he's approaching engaging voters, even though he's a man of color. And we got a lot of love for Yang Gang here. But I think, though, that I think the Harris withdrawal really sort of put this issue of the fact that right now it's highly unlikely to have any voters of color in the qualify for the December 20th debate. And I think a lot of us are sort of reevaluating how we've approached this process, because there was a certain segment of sort of the Latino left, basically, that are, primarily with Sanders, but now some increasingly with Warren. And then there was a certain set of another big chunk of our electorate, which is kind of like the Gen X / Boomer Latinos that are more moderate, more traditional Democrats, and just brand loyalty means something. So Biden's like comfortable sneakers, and so and also hedging their bets that they're concerned around there not being a someone that can be Trump, and basically very skeptical of how white people are going to vote next year across the board. So, but now we've sort of approached this with that mentality. We approach this election not maybe given Harris or Booker or Castro or others the kind of look maybe they deserve from us, and now there's what we're left with. And so I think that's definitely a loss. And then on the candidate side, quite honestly, it helps Biden because that's one less argument that can be made to the Black community around not supporting Biden. Now, at the end of the day, she wasn't a major factor, and we can argue how much of a factor she would have been, but that's one less hindrance. And, look, I'm sure there's been communications. I don't have any reporting on this, but, this is also a nod to Biden, like, hey, if you're thinking about a VP, I got out of your way early and, kind of took some blood off your hands before you got to South Carolina, because as you recall, just the bad reaction and some of those moments that the Clintons had, and I'm saying the Clintons because it wasn't just Hillary, it was Bill, when the Clintons had to deal with the Obama dynamic, and that's how, leading up to that South Carolina primary, some unforced errors led to ultimately that defeat. So definitely a win for Biden, and I think for voters of color, a reckoning as to what's next.
Yeah, no, and I think the other thing too, I think you saw the certain amount of freedom, almost a certain amount of exhale, right? That it seems like she let out once this was done, right? And I think and she clapped back very, very quickly, right, at the president when the president talked about congratulating her for running, in this snarky kind of way, running a good campaign, and she was like, well, I'm going to see you in the trial, right? Which brings up very quickly, on impeachment, right? We had another set of hearings again. And you had Pelosi today talking about the articles very quickly. Speaker Pelosi announced today that the House Democrats are going to proceed with the articles of impeachment, have the hearings this week with the constitutional scholars. Do you think impacted the politics of impeachment?
Yeah, well, they certainly didn't hurt. I really like the fact that these scholars not only were obviously prepared, but they came up with very quotable moments that were very forceful around, what impeachment and what our Constitution is about. And that's been one of my most frustrating things around this process, is that it's clear to me when you look at how the Republicans are behaving in the House, how we anticipate them behaving in the Senate, and obviously all the minions that are part of this administration, is that, and obviously the president being the most obvious bad actor here, is that ultimately there's such a dearth of leadership in one of the major parties of this country and such a spinelessness, which is so sad. But there's also the underlying illness is that we have 40% of the country, however you want to define it in the polls, that they would rather have this rhetorical comfort around their lifestyle, around their race, around their worldview, their closed-mindedness. They would rather have that than a democracy. They would rather have that than ethical government, because the polls continually tell us that group of people, 35, 40%, really ain't moving. And there's no more evidence. I mean, the Democrats in the House couldn't have run this more professionally and couldn't have run this more, calmly, for lack of a better term. Adam Schiff is not a wildcat personality, but so that's a sad thing for me. So I think it's very important that once the Democrats impeach this fool, that's our president, that we do everything we can. And I go to my people, think about all these Republicans that are up for re-election next year. I got 2 in Georgia. You got any family in ATL? They need to be calling, or in a military base in the South or North Carolina, any of those, South Carolina. We got all kind of family in those communities. All those Republicans are up for re-election. They need to be getting phone calls. My people in Pennsylvania, Pat Toomey, and tell these people you have no shame. You really are, your political life and your fear of this white nationalist voting base that's been raised in your party that you fomented. You're going to pick making our country a autocracy and unruly and unethical and divisive. Shameful. So we need to stand up now. So win or lose on the legislative fight, we have something to say, and we need to, and I keep saying this, we don't only need to win next November. Politically, we need to crush this movement, because it's not only harmful to people like you and me, LB, but it's also going to ruin our democracy. And that's a deeper issue than the racial dynamic that we often harp on here on Found in Translation. I
think it's true, and I think that's what the scholars are really underscoring, right? I think that was the number one thing that I heard that they were talking about in terms of the lasting effects of having this president. And we've seen it, right? We've seen how this, how the way he has run, not just him, but the way his agency heads have run government has had a ripple effect, right? And again, I think, 4 more years of that. I always tell people it's not just what's going on in the executive branch, it's also what's going on in the agencies. I mean, we just saw the new working rules that we're going to talk about that on Snap, right? Again, it's all those things they're saying. But but again, I want to let folks know that we are listening to Found in Translation talk show, and this is just the beginning part of our segment. We're very excited. We've got our guest in the green room. So yes, LB, before you introduce our very special guest, who not only is literally one of the best 3 or 4 people we could have possibly had on the show to talk about this incredible drama that's happening at Harvard University that's impacting Latinos students, Latinos in higher education, Latino faculty, and really speaks to this glass ceiling that we have in higher education in our country for our community, but someone who's part of the family. And this is a long overdue conversation, and I'm so happy that our very special guest, who LB's going to introduce, is coming on. But I want to let my people know that you're going to go to class, because the professor we're bringing on is going to kick some knowledge, not only about education, but the sort of the state of play of diversity in this country. And so someone shared with me the other day, said, Ralph, Ray, watching the Found in Translation cruise like going to class. So I'm letting people know, bring out your books, my friends. It is time to take some notes here. Boom, out there, because we're about to take y'all to school around what's going on at Harvard and the things we have to engage in, how we support our students and our Latinas and Latinos in academia who are right now under attack in some of the most prestigious institutions in this country. No, es verdad. And one of the things that surprised me, looking at the news that came out, this week out of Harvard, was how, Ray, no matter how many things, no matter how old we get, right? And folks who say it all the time, right? The more things change, right? The more things stay the same, right? Here we are talking about another person of color, another Latina, another Latino professor in the Ivies not getting really the recognition that they deserve, right? And so, who better, right, to shine a light on what's happening at Harvard, right? Who better than our friend, right? And how our friend, Dr. Jaime. Dr. Jaime is an assistant professor of performing and media arts and Latina studies at Cornell University. I want to stress the doctor, because, folks work hard for that. So whenever you have a professor, make sure you let them know, like, you appreciate that doctor, right? Because that's Ivy League professor too, No doubt. I love this. But look, her storied academic career has included a recent scholar in residence at NYU. She's a published author whose current monograph under review is entitled "Queer Norican: Radicalized Sexualities and Aesthetics in Loizada." Jaime is also an accomplished poet who is well known for hosting the world-renowned poetry slams at the New York Poets Cafe. I mean, come on, man. I mean, I can't.
Get her on the screen.
We gotta bring up on the screen. We gotta bring up the screen,
Hands up to the
screen. Y'all blew it up so much now. I feel like, oh wow, okay.
You better stay. We don't play.
Pressure's on.
Professor, how are you? It's so great to see you.
Great. It's great to see y'all.
A big part of the fam right here. How many memories do we have hanging out with Professor?
803.
It's so many good friends, and it's amazing how. I mean, the whole squad, Joanne, Patricia, the whole fam.
Everybody. It's like
not only how much fun was it hang out when we were cool and younger. We're still cool. We're just not as
we're
young.
Just like younger.
Youngish.
The younger.
But that how accomplished this group is, and again, Dr. Jaime, the best person to talk about this, of course. And I know, and I'm so glad that we brought up your poetry background because so many people know you in the poetry world, the poetry slam community. So I know some of my poetry heads are like, "Yo, that's Karen." So this is great. So look, this is an issue with Professor Lorgia Garcia Pena, a super accomplished academic rock star that everyone across the spectrum in the Harvard community, and then obviously in your academic circles, knows is well deserving and well overdue to be tenured at a university like Harvard. They're lucky to have her. And for her to get this rebuke, this sort of stunning denial of her tenureship, which she was the only Latina sort of on the tenure track, was shocking to all of us. So, Professor, let's just start with what was your initial reactions? I know this was a big issue in your network, and just tell us how you felt about this and how it's unfolded over the last week.
Well, the thing is that it's shocking and it's not shocking, right? These institutions are very happy to continue gatekeeping while masking a desire to focus on diversity, inclusion, and equity. I think it's shocking in the sense that what more could Lorgia do to get tenure? You raise the standards, the more of us that get these jobs, and then and you continue to make it more and more challenging for us to do that. I think part of it wasn't as shocking, not because she wasn't deserving, but because there was also the situation at Yale that happened with Elbert Laguna. It's like Yale and Harvard continue to do more of the same and continue to demonstrate an investment in just replicating the same models of knowledge, right? Students have been challenging, have been working to have an ethnic studies department at Harvard for 48 years. So this isn't just yesterday. I mean, they're doing searches now to try to bring in more faculty of color, and she's a part of that search. So think about what it looks like when you have somebody that's on the search committee to bring more people of color in, yet you're saying we're not going to give tenure to you, even though you've gone above and beyond everything that we asked you to do, even though your work is field defining, even though you are arguably the top contemporary scholar writing in Dominican studies, writing in Caribbean studies, right? What does that say about Harvard and their investment in maintaining the status quo?
Ironic that this happens, talk about the influence of the Dominicans in the Boston area and in New England, right?
Mm-hmm.
This happens the same week, LB, got to bring it back to my sports, that the Boston Red Sox announced that Big Papi and Manny Ramirez are going to get their numbers retired together this summer, which is very nice, very family-oriented. LB, jump in this conversation. Elbert Garcia. This issue's close to your heart, dog. Jump in there, brother.
This is also
Are you a Yankee fan, LB? Are you a Yankee fan?
No. I'm sorry.
Okay. I'm gonna have to log off now.
I know. He's a Met.
Yeah, I'm a Met fan, yo. That's a separate conversation.
Some of us deserve
That's a separate conversation. Why? Okay. We'll have a moment of silence for that. Okay. Anyway, Mira,
jump in there.
No, but look, I mean, this is also happening on the heels of Julia Mejia, right? In terms of her election, right, in Boston, right? But it's not just in terms of one professor. It's never about one professor, right?
No, it's not.
It's about these students and these faculty folks, right? Talking about in terms of ethnic studies and ethnic studies program. Why, for those who might not know, and I say again, ethnic studies with a capital E and a capital S, right? Like ethnic studies as a department. Why is it such an important part of the larger conversation of inclusion in higher education? And why is this such a threat to places like Harvard or Yale?
Well, I'm actually going to quote from, Lorgia wrote a recent article, a micro-editorial for Asterisk Journal entitled A Meditation on Possibility in Academia. And I'm actually just going to quote from that because I think she summarizes it perfectly. Like, ethnic studies departments and programs make our universities a little less biased, a little less racist, a little less white. They provide students with spaces for thinking and writing about important questions. They also provide support for students of color who are made to feel in every other course like second-class citizens who are reminded that they don't belong. How is this not a reaffirmation of those same feelings? How is this not telling these students fighting for this department and these scholars of color to be tenured that what they choose to study does not hold merit? We are not willing to tenure the only Latina on the tenure track at Harvard. We are saying that what she is teaching, the work that she has done is subpar because it's not the type of work that is legible to the majority whites that have control of the institution. Because the way that tenure works at Harvard, which is interesting, which is part of what sort of animates the conversation, is that it really came down to, I think it was the president, right?
Yeah, that's the bochinche, right? That was about to say that. That's the point right there, right? That's the bochinche that I've heard on the scene that folks have said that. So, and again, this is really strange, right? Because a lot of times, and you can, I mean, from my knowledge of working on these issues, universities like to hide sometimes behind the faculty committees, right? They say, oh, well, there's scholarship there. And so we want to make sure we give academic freedom to our faculty folks. That was always, at our time at Columbia, that was always the issue in terms of there. Here, there's a situation increasingly that it seems like folks in our own field, folks even on our own university campus recognize the place that she has to or should be playing, at the university. And for some reason, it was at the top that was nixed, right? And so I guess the real question is, for some people, people might be like, well, these are just, these are Ivy League institutions. These are education institutions. What's the real practical effect, right? What's the practical effect on everyday people when academia or academics like Garcia Pena aren't allowed to reach those levels, or even professors like yourself eventually down, like they're not given in terms of those resources to produce the scholarship that they are trying, this cutting edge scholarship, this racist breaking scholarship. What's the real practical effect on everyday people, right? The person hanging out, at the bodega or at the club, what's the practical effect?
Well, on one hand, it limits our conditions of possibility. It automatically delineates that there's a ceiling to which we cannot pass, right? There's also a way in which the stories of everyday people and different communities are rendered invisible, are rendered not as important, are not analyzed, or are not studied. If you think about our crew, right? We started off the conversation reminiscing about our crew. We were everyday people that went to these institutions, and we gravitated toward faculty members that were constantly in search of faculty members who would teach material that spoke to our everyday experience so we could actually go back and give to our communities and inspire other people to also, move forward, right? Everyday people, I think, is not just about, okay, we hang out at the club, right? Like we still engage with gente, right? Because we are gente. We came from gente. So what does it mean when you limit our conditions of possibility and say that our stories aren't worth telling, that our identities, our culture is not worth studying, that they're not valid, right? That limits what we're able to accomplish.
Yeah. No. And I think, I think we're getting some positive, we're getting some positive feedback online. Again, our friend Cristina Vega, agrees. It says important topics for Latina educators and loving it as a topic for Latino educators and stuff. I mean, again, I think people feel like these are separate, but these are real issues. That's actually part of the whole community focus of ethnic studies, right? How you can't separate the scholarship and the activism, right? Because, it goes back to this idea, right, of knowledge being power, right? Yes. And so in some ways, this is the number one, it's almost like right there in front of your face that folks are trying to limit the potential power that folks have by limiting in some ways the creation of
and understanding our histories, right? If we think about something like the Young Lords Party in New York, right? It starts in Chicago, and the group of people that started in Chicago was a different demographic than the group of people that started in New York, right? We're thinking about and just different activist movements, right? A lot of this is college youth that are like, oh, I'm studying all of these courses. Who's talking about me? Who's actually theorizing and putting into action ways to eradicate the injustices that we face on an everyday level? How can we put into practice a lot of these means of consciousness raising that we analyze in the classroom to work within our communities? So if you don't have folks like myself, if you don't have folks like Lorgia or Elbert at Yale, or I have friends, Letia Brown, if you don't have these people telling these stories and making it clear through practice for these students that these are possibilities, that we have a history of engagement, that we are beyond the stereotypes that we're constantly confronted with, then we're never going to reach beyond those points, right? Then the ivory tower always stays very white, always stays very privileged,
and
always.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes configured as a space that's always inaccessible to us. That's never ours. So how do we begin to claim spaces and mark those spaces as this is my space too, and my story has as much merit as yours? And when I say story, I don't mean just like your life story. I mean like, okay, let's talk about health. Let's talk about Latino health. Those are classes in ethnic studies class that would be taught in an ethnic studies department. What if it's not just humanities, right? Like there are different issues impacting communities of color and Latino communities that are tied into migratory histories, migratory patterns that you're just not going to get when you take that everyday history class.
Elby, what the Jaime Escalante teaches students said, your ancestors invented the concept of zero.
Right.
So it goes in all sciences.
Yeah.
Let me jump in here, Elby, because you really hit on something. Professor Karen Jaime in the building, one of Cornell's finest, doing her thing in academia. We're so proud of her, a great friend. Is that you really hit on something, because one of the seminal books that I read as a high school student, Professor, was Down These Mean Streets by Peter. Now, one of the reasons that I bring that up is not only because it was personally significant for me,
sure,
as a Philly Puerto Rican kid whose father, by the way, was in the Young Lords in Philly, but that there was such a dearth. Like that was, I don't know, 40 years before, 30 years before. And we were still bringing them on campus, even as a senior citizen. My point is that there were so few options. So thank God there was that one book that related to me as an urban youth, right? But that, so that the telling of our stories, there's such an identity to it. And the biggest thing I get at the show, and I say it all the time, professors, that the because okay, yeah, like commentary, but they're like, how do you know the Karens and the Elbies, and just creating this one humble space so that we could just share and show people, like, you don't have to be bougie to be successful. You can be down and be a regular person and be comfortable in your Latino identity. So these are very important issues. And so Christina Vega, a great friend, educator, who I definitely want to connect you with, Doctor. She actually just founded about a year ago her own Latina her own organization to support survivors of domestic violence. So she's doing some great things here. And of course, Michael Collazo jumps in on the importance of ethnic studies. That's actually my next question, brother, because, one of the things that's been interesting, especially this week that's been reported, Professor, is that the students at Harvard not only are trying to support Professor Pena Garcia, but have brought up the bigger conversation around, we've been waiting almost 50 years, generations of Latino Black students have been 48 years have been advocating for ethnic studies. You still don't have it. So why don't you explain to our audience what ethnic studies is from like an academic perspective, and why this part of the conversation is so critically important?
Right. Well, wow. So I'm going to give my definition, and folks can chime in if I miss stuff. But when we think about ethnic studies, we think about different, the socio-political and cultural histories, everyday experiences, and realities of communities of color in the United States. So what brought you here, what happens when you get here, and how do you navigate being here? And that's not just, humanities focused. You can look at issues of science. It engages with a lot of different disciplines in doing that. But what that does is, I think, I keep going back to Garcia Pena's quote, because I think that she really hammers it in, right? Thinking about conditions of possibility and thinking about what that psychically means for, I'm going to focus on Latino students who come in often as first generation, what it means to be able to take a class that's actually talking about the politics of space where you grew up.
And by the way, what is
language?
By the way, what does it mean for non-Latinos?
All of a sudden, they're exposed to communities beyond the stereotypes that they see on screen. So what does that mean socially? It's that you're just not going to see all of these misrepresentations on screen, the stuff that you read in the books, and actually get a more complete and multifaceted representation of Latinidad. Majoritarian society gets that. You have the white bad guy, the white good guy, the doctor, all of these things. We'll get one. So what does it mean when you're able to interrogate and study different representations of Latinos? So for example, I teach a class on spoken word, hip hop theater, and the politics of performance. And I had the students do their end of semester performances today. And for many of them, this was the first time that they performed. They wrote their own pieces. They got up. And I was incredibly touched by the fact that for many of them, they were like, I've never taken a class like this. I've never taken a class where I could actually get up and talk about my identity, talk about what I deal with every day, framed within different social justice movements as consciousness raising, and be able to do it and do it well and get a response and be validated and have my experience, not just in this institution, but my experience, broadly defined, validated as, oh, that matters. That's something, right? Like all of a sudden they're able to understand their identity within different, within society as a whole.
And using our the ways that we communicate culturally as Latinos, especially Caribbean Latinos.
Yes.
As people of color, as urban people, going back to your spoken word background as well. And that thinking about like one of the reasons, and I'm not a musicologist and I'm not academic like you are, I'm just a fan and someone that pays attention. But one of the reasons, hip hop, when we were, over the years, and the Spanish language iterations of reggaeton, Latin trap. Now it's diverse like anything else. But one of the reasons this is penetrating not only the Caribbean Latino world and Latin America and U.S. Latinos and globally is that it's a form of expression speaking to these realities of people in underserved parts of the world.
Exactly.
Which happen to be Latin America and, in this case, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, countries being the focal point. LB, get back on screen, brother, because this is a man as an activist, as a journalist, as a political operative that has a great passion for ethnic study.
Well, I tell you the thing.
I'm
jumping up a bit. I'm jumping up a bit on this one.
Jump in there, brother. Jump in.
I guess what I want to, talk to the good doctor about was, this is what's interesting to me too, is that even within Latino studies, right? Even within Latinidad, what's so groundbreaking about professors like Garcia Pena, right, is that she's putting a specific Afro-Latino, a specific Dominican Black lens, focal point perspective on this, right? And so that's also, I guess my question to you is like, speak a little bit about that and in some ways how the field itself, like where the field is now, right? Because I think for a certain part of time, it seemed like the field was getting a little stagnated, right? And yet now you really have a kind of a cadre of up and coming, I think, scholars who are coming in and really trying to bring this scholarship down to the roots, and also really talking and going both forward and back, exploring, ideas and things that we sometimes take for granted, relationships. You've got a professor like, who's doing some work down here at FIU on Afro-Cuban, relations and the view of perspectives on Blackness in Cuba. Harvard itself had a very big Afro-Latino conference last year, right, in terms of those kind of participations. So again, what's the explain to our audience the significance of having an Afro-Latina, giving that specific opportunity for tenure, not just at a place like Harvard, but just in general.
Just in general.
Well,
I think that what it does, on one level, it allows for a more expansive and capacious understanding of Blackness in terms of the institution, right? So it's a reframing of Blackness as diasporic, and people read that in a book and people see that in a book, but with folks that generate and create such groundbreaking research. And they're just, I will say this, I have interacted with Lorgia, we've been at conferences together, incredibly kind, incredibly generous, and one of the most brilliant thinkers, right? So her work is unquestionable. I think that what someone like her brings to the table is an expansive understanding of Blackness as diasporic, a complication of Latinidad beyond sort of whiteness or whitewashing. I think if we look at historically the ways in which a lot of Latino studies programs have been configured and the way in which Latinidad is represented in terms of the media. There's always a great deal of whitewashing, right? We still operate within the U.S. binary rather than complicating notions of ethnic identity along the lines of race in the ways that it occurs back home, right? You talk about going back. If we think about places like DR, yes, we can be like, oh, DR is really racist. DR thinks about race along different categorical lines than the United States, right? We'll go Trigueñito, we'll go here, we'll go there. And there's a lot of reasons about that. And Lorgia would be much better equipped to talk about this because this is a part of her research. And these are sort of interventions that she's made in conversations before that I've greatly appreciated. But I think it complicates it, not just for the institution, because it's now, well, Blackness is not just AFAM studies, but I think it also does that within Latino communities as well. Right. It's like, oh, no, we need to engage with this because this is a part of us and this is a part of the history that we need to engage with.
Yeah. And I think it's been interesting because that came up in a political context when Congressman Espaillat became a member of U.S. Congress, and he tried to not only become a member of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, which was a no-brainer, but he also tried to become a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. And he argued with politics of that. He's trying to mitigate the chance of an African-American challenger in future elections. But my point is that this generation in this time period, and I see it in social media, we see it in our activism. Now it's bubbling up to higher education. That particularly women, and particularly Dominican women, are standing up for their Afro-Latinidad and saying, we're not going to you're not going to pigeonhole us in these categories, and you're not going to diminish our Latina-ness because of our because of us being pride in our Blackness. So this is a very important conversation. There's a lot of ramifications around the future of this country because we also have people that are Afro-Latino from the fact that maybe they have a Hispanic parent and an African-American parent. So that's a different dynamic, right? And there's a lot of nuances, right? But we got to get to Professor, how are we going to help these Harvard students? How are we going to help Professor Pena Garcia? I know there's a lot of people that are like, we want to help her, want to support her.
I think it's constant visibility. I think what ends up happening is also, we talk about this for a minute, we lose a little bit of steam. What really needs to happen, and I always put the word out in the same way that I did for my friend Elbert when his situation happened at Yale, Cubano, who also didn't get tenure because, that's how these things go, is we have to, keep putting the information out there, B, keep spreading the word and saying, well, who has a job, right? Because all of this activism doesn't work. What happens if the appeal doesn't go through? We can't have our folks out here without a job, right? So we have to start thinking about how can we continue to make sure that we don't lose focus on this, that we continue to combat this, supporting the students, follow their lead, right? Follow the leaders, put pressure on, in terms of me, right? Put pressure on my colleagues that aren't necessarily Latino that have institutional power, right? Let's talk about allyship, not just lip service, but allyship, supporting the students there that are the ones doing that are doing the 48-second sit-ins. There's a person that showed up to their faculty meeting. I don't know if y'all read this. Somebody that showed up to their faculty meeting and just held up a sign, right? And the president wanted to kick this person out of the meeting. And they were like, who else votes to kick them out? And they were like, no, we want them to stay. So that's powerful. Not step away from that, not lose sight of that, continue to draw attention to it, because I think we have to continue the practice of public shaming, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
that's
right. They definitely need that.
LB, what's your you've been a part of one or two of these efforts to get inclusion at higher ed institutions. What's a organizing word of advice you have for our folks out there? Again, there's people that want to get involved, support these students, and obviously with the holidays coming up, and
Well, I think that's the thing, right? That's why they do these things. They make these decisions right near the end of the semester. I mean, I think Karen, I'm sure you can attest that so many professors
right before you get back and the students are there.
Yep, and the professors are already tired, right? The professors are on their last legs anyway. They're grading papers, they're doing stuff, right? And so, and I think that's the point. And so I think part of it is almost, I would say, take a page from our folks in the congressional, right? How folks they use that congressional break to go back home, to listen to people, to collect, in terms of information, to do the same thing, right? I would say in terms of those students, use the next couple of weeks to continue to organize, to continue to do that. And I think it's part of I think, Karen, you're totally right. As part of our part of our job as adults, especially as alumni, not only of these institutions, to actually knock on that door, right? And so I think, the truth is that we were part of a generation, a first wave of generation of Latinos and people of color who are attending these institutions, not the first ones, but the first in a large, in terms of
en masse. We came in en masse.
Yeah, and I think that it's time for us to start to flex a little bit. It's time for us to start to flex, and those of us who have really, really good jobs, who some of these places might look at potential as donors, but even those who are not, in terms of there is strength in numbers, and more importantly, there's strength also in the positions and the titles we have. that we have in terms of our current jobs. And I think that's part of the reason, Ray. I think that's, if we didn't go to these schools, look, we didn't go to these schools to grab our degrees and get the hell out, right? We went to these schools to live.
If you did, we're here to remind you that's not the way it should go.
We remember you.
You know what I'm saying? But let me say this, LB, to that point. You just made an excellent point. Is that we cannot underestimate the power that we have. I'm just thinking about, think about all these networks. Think about the Brown Ivy Network. And I'm thinking about my homie Marco Davis and all of our wonderful friends, Julio Varela, who's been on top of it, with his media coverage. Thinking about the Latino community, and especially the Dominican community in the Boston area.
Yeah, this should be an insult. This should be an insult.
This woman needs y'all. Y'all gotta have her back. We all do. I'm not just.
Where's David in all of this?
Where's one of many, right? Elected officials, just powerful people in that community. And just thinking about the Latinos and Latinas and Latinx population within academic circles around the country. This is a time for all of us to get together. And I commit to, and Professor, we're going to follow your lead. And of course, the Harvard Latinx communities leader, direction. I'm down with going to Boston if we need to, because Dr. Garcia Pena needs our support. And I'm
ready to sit in an office.
Oh yeah. Well, nowadays we just got to bring cushions with us because
that's it. So long on the floor.
The hips don't work the same.
But seriously, there's a letter that is being written and signed that I will circulate once it's still being edited. I will circulate so that is also made public through y'all.
Absolutely.
That we're writing and signing in support of Lorgia, because it's also about them knowing that she's not alone, that she's part of a larger community, not just of academics, but a larger community as a whole.
Well, Professor, you've been such a great part of this, and
thank you so much.
Next time you come back, this is what we're going to do. I want to do a show, and y'all the leads, because I'm not as fluent and artistic as y'all. I want to bring you on, and one of my homies. I don't know if you know. Do you know Joaquin C. Guatanejo from Dallas?
No.
He's just one of the great. I put him on level with you. Just one of the great spoken word, and he does a lot of education activism and education trade. So I want to bring him on the show with you. We just talk about poetry. Y'all can kick it a little bit.
Let's do it.
Talk about how we engage our young people and our community in education related to their natural creative expression. I think that's a real powerful message. And on a personal level, girl, it's so great to see you.
Let's do it. And, I'm ready.
I know you're stuck in the hinterland, but we'll connect very soon.
No, but I'm going to be in Philly at some point. I'm going to hit you up.
Oh, I'm about to say, I'm waiting for you to come down to Miami because
I'm ready for Miami. Miami's got sun and sand. I'm ready to make it happen.
Professor, let people know where they can find you on social media. And again, it was so great to have you on the show.
All right. So on Twitter, you can find me at K Jaime. The last name is spelled J-A-I, M as in Mary, E as in Edward. You can also just email me at Cornell, kj12@cornell.edu.
Thank you so much, Professor Jaime.
Thank y'all. Have a good night.
You're the best. And all the best, and support Professor Garcia Pena. Give her our best, okay? We're with her.
I will definitely do.
And our Christian family, 100% for sure. Elby, this is the one of the few times, and by the way, I believe Columbia spanked Harvard on homecoming this year. Columbia, we actually have some love for the Crimson. I mean, this doesn't happen every day. And I'm thinking about Julio Varela and Dario Collado and all our Izzy Villanueva, all our Harvard buddies. This is a rare occurrence, so you better take advantage of this moment of unity.
It's a rare occurrence, but not for us Dominicans, right? Strong connections between the Grupo Quisqueyano of Harvard University and Columbia University. So I just want to give a shout out to folks like Anna Sepin.
I tell you, for a guy from Washington Heights, you're awfully Boston friendly. That's all I got to say. I'm just saying. I don't need you rocking no green Celtic jerseys in the spring, my friend.
Well, Horford's not there anymore, so I'm just saying. I don't got no reason.
Shout out to his dear mother who actually covered the day I ran. You were there, 2004. Remember the journalist who covered me voting? That's his mother, really saying also. So
we got to have a show. You got to have a show.
No, Doña Relly's a tremendous person, activist, particularly when she was in Atlanta. Living there, obviously, she had a radio show. Just a wonderful person. And again, thank you, Dr. Karen Jaime, just a great friend and brought a lot to the table on the show. And thank you for listening and watching Final Translation Show. We're going to kick off the last segment of the show by playing my favorite game, Where's Ray? So,
all right.
Talk to us, brother.
So look, I'm gonna show a couple of pictures of Ray, and let's see if we can figure out. This is like one of those Carmen Sandiego things. Where Where? ¿Dónde está Collazo? Vamos a ver. Vamos.
See the first picture, the first clue.
Hmm.
Oh, well, I mean, that kind of sums it up here. So let's see here.
I don't know. I mean, it's cold. What is it? It's
Forum.
cold.
What would be at the Pfizer Forum? And I do look a little chilly there.
The problem is that building in the back actually reminds there's a bunch of Metro Llama houses in Washington Heights that kind of look like a rise above 138th Street. That kind of looks like that, so it could throw you off. So you really don't quite know.
Pfizer Forum. That's an odd one.
Let's get another. Let's grab you another one. Let's just see. What about this one?
Oh! I look a lot toastier. That's for sure.
Inside, definitely.
I'm inside there. That's a snazzy arena. And I believe those are the letters NBA.
Look at that.
Where was I, LB? Where was I, brother? Share it with the people.
Well, my good friend, you were down in the great state of Wisconsin, not just anywhere in Wisconsin, but in Somalo, Hassenpfeffer Incorporated, Milwaukee. Now, why would our Ray Collazo be in Milwaukee this week? Why would that?
It certainly was. It came as a bit of a surprise, but fortunately, and I must thank our friends at the Democratic National Convention Committee for inviting me as part of a delegation of activists that were able to do a tour and had a logistical briefing of the details of the upcoming 2020 Democratic National Convention, which is going to take place this summer in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Of course, Wisconsin, many of the observers and political pundits believe will be basically the state that determines who's the next president. And so our esteemed head of the DNC and his leadership, Tom Perez, speaking of Dominicanos, have elected Milwaukee as the head of where the convention is going to be. So I got a briefing. It actually was
Christina.
No, not Chicago, girl, in Milwaukee. Close, 100 miles. It was chilly, Pfizer Forum. And so it's going to be at the Pfizer Forum, which of course is where my dreaded Milwaukee Bucks play, the Greek Freak and all those guys play there. But it's a great, beautiful facility. And it actually, talk about the Harris situation. It was actually the moment that Kamala Harris dropped out of the race. I literally was around 100 Democratic actors getting a tour of that facility, and everyone stopped paying attention to the tour guide because everybody's like, everybody's bochinchando and gossiping, and did you see this? Did you see this? Like I said, a lot of black females, leadership, Democrats, and then all of my homies start texting me, did you see what happened? What happened? So it was quite a time, but I got a lot of intel, brother. Let me tell people about the DNC. So first of all, and I got up and said this in front of the leadership of the Democratic National Committee Convention. I speak for y'all. Let me tell you something. I don't go to these things and queda callado. I speak for the hood. And I told him, I said, look, the Latino activist class and the diverse activist class ain't too happy because basically this was a choice. Are you going to put in a location like a Phoenix or a Miami or an Atlanta or a Houston or a New Orleans where you can show off the diversity of our party and sort of the new Democratic coalition, right? No, they picked the coldest, whitest place they can find, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. But, and this is one of the things I want to emphasize to y'all on the show. Again, get your notepads out. Milwaukee, Wisconsin, very white. The city of Milwaukee is a very diverse community. A lot of Latinos, a lot of African Americans. Let me tell you something. I went the extra mile for y'all. I'm going to break this down.
What'd you do, Ray?
When I landed on that plane at 8 in, I could have taken an Uber. I could have taken a cab to the Pfizer Forum. But I said, you know what? I want to see the neighborhood. I want to see the real Milwaukee. Rush hour. I took the 80 bus from the airport to downtown Milwaukee. Let me tell you something, brother. 60-40 Latino to black customers on the bus. And the most telling moment to me, everybody was very, very nice. Everybody was friendly. People chatting with me, showing me where to go.
Yeah, Midwest charm.
No doubt. The most telling moment to me, 2 stops before the Pfizer Forum in downtown Milwaukee, is the local community college. When we pulled up to that local community college, the 3 young women on that bus, an African-American and 2 Latinas, got off that bus to go to school. So you tell me, what's the future? Who are the people working hard, investing in the future of a city like Milwaukee, Wisconsin, this young generation of women of color?
Well, this is the thing, right? And it would do well to the Democratic Party to make that part of their narrative, right? To make that
Thank
part
you.
of the way, right? Because
that's exactly
that's what it is, right? That's the thing, and yet you would know, right? Like, and again, I think it's part of our, there's a lot to be said about conventions and what they do, and there's a lot of work. People do a lot of work behind the scenes to get there. We hear the primaries, we hear the caucuses, all those things are very, very important. But the truth of the matter is, there's a lot of work that's done actually at that convention too, right? Proposals, committees, platforms, things like that. And it's one of these things, especially I think as we talk about, as this debate goes on around, are folks of color, are not just the concerns of folks of color, but is the leadership of folks of color at the center of the Democratic Party? Well, how do we do that? Well, we've got to do that in every facet. So it can't just be the window dressing of candidates, right? It's got to be, and it can't be just even the window dressing of even campaign staffers and things like that. It's got to be at the core of how these parties run and function. And it pleases me the depth to hear in terms of about that diversity. And yet it scares me that this party might fumble an opportunity to really put forth a really good effort and fob it up at its convention by basically forgetting the people who are in that convention. I
want to shout out Carmen Cabrera, a fantastic Puerto Rican organizer, activist in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who was unfortunately, the only Latina or Latino, Hispanic that I saw that was part of this convening that was a local Milwaukee person. Well, actually one of two, one of the leadership. Want to also shout out Danielle Decker, a Latina who's one of the leaders of it, who's also a local person. But 2 out of 100 people, you're trying to represent for the local community here. And the other telling thing, and I want to give people a real heads up on this one, because this is the one I brought up as well, which I was concerned about, is that, and especially for my Dominican hustlers, they're going to spend, and this was the big thing that they showed off about at this event, they're going to spend $80 million putting that convention together those 4 days. So my question, and I know Elby's question, and I know I'm thinking about our homegirl Dionelli Reyes, our Dominican hustlers are, who gonna make that money? Somebody gonna make that money.
You know who they need to call? They need to call Wendy Garcia in the New York City Comptroller's office. Wendy Garcia is in charge of Scott Stringer's efforts on not just in terms of diversity and inclusion, but in terms of MWBE programs and things like that. Call up the state of New York. Those are folks who are really kind of leading the way and trying to do that.
Chicago's an hour away. Look at all the business people in the Chi. They're right there. Man. And this was the big one that they shared with me, brother. You're really going to like this one. They said the 2 areas that they're going to need diverse vendors the most to apply for these RFPs are transportation and event planning and execution, because the city of Milwaukee only has enough hotels for the leadership, the delegates, the principals of organizations, the top political people. Everyone else's extended teams are going to have to stay in hotels in Madison, Wisconsin. So they're going to have a fleet of shuttles, of cars, vans.
Eso suena como high class livery cab service going to just.
That's exactly what it's going to be. I think we need to get a fleet together, bro, against our Dominican homies and put an RFP together. And LB, can we find some people that can throw a party?
Yeah.
I mean, you tell me. There's a lot of money. I'm serious, people. We need to get on those lists to make some money. And by the way, for people that don't know, some would say, humbly, actually, NJ.com said this. You can look it up. That our crew, I'm thinking about my man Jose Rodriguez, Elvis Bonilla, my pop Ray Collazo, our squad, threw the best salsa party at the DNC. We helped put together Senator Menendez's. So we got a track record for throwing a good jam. Thinking about all our party plans around the country. Get with me. We need to do some business and make some money. No question.
And at the end of the day, this is the big thing. And I think it's a big reminder as 2020 comes in all seriousness, right? The truth of the matter is that a lot of money is spent on these political campaigns. And there's a lot to be said about getting money out of politics, right? But until that day comes, the reality is that our communities shouldn't be left shut out of the door in terms of these opportunities. Our small business owners, our marketers, our folks there, right? Like
especially when we're the party. Without the party, without people of color, you have nothing.
Yeah. So
by the way, our especially in our economy, our economy's doing. I mean, you can argue different facets of it, but the reason our economy is not collapsing is because of the technological innovations and small business acumen of this new generation of people in this country, which is very diverse, heavily Hispanic, and very female. So, you know, I mean, and without us, Democrats have zilch going on. I mean, they'd be a fringe party in this country. So we need to make some of that money. So if y'all got any ideas, and if we got some whips in the Midwest, we can get up there and zigzag and vote for Madison.
Put in the comments.
Because I got the hookup. And we can get on some lists. You know what I'm saying? So we're doing some things. I do want to talk about.
I do
want to talk about. Let me tell you something. You know, because a lot of people focus with this Trump guy on the rhetoric and the corruption and the sexy headlines, and that's very true. But there was a rule, and I'll referenced it earlier today. But I want to give people a little more context to this. A rule now. This administration has now passed. It's now going to go in the law, which is now going to deny an estimated 700,000 American families SNAP benefits, like we say, food stamps in the hood, SNAP benefits. And now many times in our country and even in our communities, we demonize people that accept that receive food stamps, SNAP benefits. Bottom line is that 700,000 people are going to have food insecurity in this country, not because of and we'll talk about the money in a second, not because of any great crisis or necessity to do it, just because of this administration's attack, particularly on people of color, but especially poor people. And the reality is for people like, oh yeah, Trump, you know, the people that are going to be impacted the most out of those 700,000 are going to be rural people. That's why last year, and I've been in my work career stuff, I've been a part of this movement to protect these SNAP benefits over the last several years. In a bipartisan way, we've been able to do it because Republicans were against doing this too, because it impacts their people, particularly in rural communities that have seasonal work and have high unemployment rates in their community. So I want to make a mathematical analogy. I want people to understand really what that means. Because people say, "Oh, we gotta save money. These people, some vago and all that bullshit," right? Pardon my French. But that of cutting this $5.5 billion out of the budget so that kids can eat and people can have basic food to live and survive.
Bullshit
compared to the almost $2 trillion tax cut that almost went exclusively for the rich. It's the equivalent in your personal budget of saying, okay, this month I'm going to take $10.50 out of the compra budget for my kid because I got to save money, and they're turning around and putting $2,000 on a credit card. I mean, that's literally the math of that.
No,
on a micro scale.
But I mean, look, and the problem is that the numbers. It's not about the numbers, right? It's not about the numbers. It's not about how the contribution of food and giving and strengthening families, those situations helps the economy, helps grow the economy, helps put money into the hands of local grocers. Like, forget all that, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about power. Right, it's about power because they can do because se le da la gana hacerlo, right? Because they would freaking want to do it, and they do it at freaking Christmas time. Coño, announcing that shit at Christmas time. I take this very personal. I think it's very personal because I was a food stamp kid. I'll say it, and I'll say it proudly.
Wig baby,
you know what I'm saying? Wig baby, freaking the block of cheese, all that joint.
Yo, you heated it up, dog. Though.
Yo, the grilled cheese, and
we hit it. Try was disgusting, but grill.
You didn't. But you know where we grilled it up? We grilled it up on the freaking on the thing, on the calefacción, on the freaking on the heater, right? You put that joint there. That was the best, melted grilled cheese on New York City housing heaters. Come on now, right? That was the joint. But the thing is, that like they're so it's SNAP. It's food. It's food. Coño, like we live in the
not even enough food. This whole stereotype. Yeah, el vago. They're luching off the system. No. We all know that even people that get SNAP benefits, it's not enough food. So there's kids missing.
It's not.
Instead of missing 3 meals a month, they're gonna miss 7. They're gonna miss 9. Then do you expect them to perform academically, and then we're gonna shame them in school with this other nonsense?
No, and it's the nonsense. The other reality, right, is the nonsense of we want you because what they're doing is that they're trying to add a work requirement, a 20 hours work requirement, right? Aside from the fact that
they already have that. The issue is there's certain states that got a waiver,
right? And so they're cutting that waiver off, right?
It's hard to,
But they're also at the same time, because NPR did an analysis of this too, right? Like they're not helping in terms of those job programs, right? A lot of the job programs that have waiting lists for people to enter into them to find whatever jobs, right? And we already know what the job market is. So what this really looks like, right? What it really looks like is a way to get people off the rolls, right? So they can not spend as much money on it, but more importantly, force people to also choose, which they're doing now, to string together 2 or 3 jobs, right? But who suffers in that, right? The childcare suffers, right? In terms of what the amount of attention that children, people's personal. I mean, there's a bunch of things that we end up paying for. Right.
Right,
and like you said, in terms of the credit card analogy, is totally perfectly right.
No,
so,
and this is supposedly part of a conservative, ethos or political philosophy. You're pro-life, quote unquote.
Yeah, I don't.
When working people and poor people in your life, you don't want to do anything for them. You want to actually hurt them. You actually want to hurt them.
This is not what
it's disgusting. And I want people to, obviously y'all didn't read your New Testament because. And I say it often on the show, but it's worth repeating. When I looked at my Bible, the Jesus was about hanging out with the poorest people in society that nobody cared about. He was a refugee baby, he hung out with sex workers, his poor mom. He was a working class guy. So, and he was ostracized and martyred by the political class to divide their community. So, I mean, it's really interesting that people that claim to be Christian, like Vice President Pence, and the evangelical leadership of the country have amnesia when it comes to what was in the New Testament to begin with.
Right?
Jesus.
Yeah, Jesus. Yeah, and Jesus is part of the one you're taking off of SNAP benefits at this point.
LB, let's talk about our main man, the guy that gets the gas face this week, Republican political leader in Central Florida, Martin Hyde.
Ay, Dios mío. He definitely gets. He and PW both
made himself.
Right? Oh my God.
People didn't see it. Much respect to our friend Julio Varela keeps coming up today.
I know.
Bubbles for staying on top of this
issue.
Shout
out to LR.
On top of this issue. Martin Hyde was at a tennis club in Central Florida. He's a Republican British immigrant. Was going to run for a commissioner seat in county in Central Florida next year. And, some young Puerto Rican tennis students were chatting on the side in Spanish by his court. And instead of just letting it go or just asking him politely to, move over a few steps so he can focus on his playing, he goes into a tirade with these young people, demands them, these are American citizens, by the way, to speak English, and then speaks ill of them to say, why don't you go cut my grass? So subsequently, he's been ostracized. He's no longer running for office. But the point bringing this up, LB, is that even as American citizens, and even as people that are obviously on some level privileged in this society where they're hanging out at a tennis club, being taught, by the way, by a Puerto Rican tennis coach.
Right? That's the thing. He's working there.
Who's also being abused verbally by this man. This climate of intolerance is impacting us on every level of society.
Yeah, no, and I think what's interesting, I think the two things that I also found interesting here, this is North Florida, and for anyone who's who's not familiar with Florida, North Florida isn't South Florida, right? There's definitely this ain't Miami, right? If there is at least some lip service to diversity and inclusion of a bunch of different cultures. And the immigrant and the strong influence of the Cuban immigrant population in South Florida, it doesn't exist in North Florida, right? But what's really interesting is that really in the last 4 to 5 years, there has been a migration of Latinos feeding into North Florida. Some of it is coming from, to the Puerto Ricans coming from the island and escaping Irma, but also people like every other place coming from different parts of the country. And what's interesting is that you see in some ways, or you're beginning to see the impact of that even in this situation, right? Because I would argue that 4 or 5 years ago, maybe this wouldn't have been picked up. Maybe he would have said it and no one would have said something about it. And this one, and obviously folks like NLR, maybe that's the reason why they continue to need to exist. And shout out to Giving Tuesday, everyone who gave money to Latino Rebels this Tuesday for supporting them, because this is the work that they do, right? But 4 or 5 years ago, this would have just been like, hey, okay. But the thing is that there is a growing presence of Latinos, of Hispanics, and Hispanic businessmen, people with small businesses in North Florida.
Middle class is growing.
In North Florida. And so I think
middle class.
Right. And so I think it's interesting, right? Because again, party leaders almost saying to this guy, yeah, we're not playing that, right? They don't want to play that, right? Which goes to show you the real tenured situation around this hate fault line that the president has created, right? Because you're starting to see at the edges some folks who are saying, I'm not really quite sure about this, right? Now, how well they're standing on it, who knows, right? I'm not going to say that they, but what is interesting is that the fact that he did have to apologize, he was almost really surprised, right? I mean, it caught him by surprise.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this is the same, this is a couple of weeks ago.
He's gotten away with it, reportedly, he's got away with it before.
Right. And he's apologized before, Dike. And now this time people are like, no, it doesn't work. So again, I would say that that's something to continue to see. How this, how the Latino community, Jacksonville, for example, just past October, they had an Hispanic Film Festival for the first time. I mean, you're starting to see in terms of Latinos being very public. Now, where does that mean? How does that mean? Look, there are different facets to the Latino community in terms of race, class, ethnicity, all those things. But interesting enough that, again, this guy would, in essence, in a place like Sarasota, home of some of the what I would say the most vile anti-racist legislation that Florida has come in, is also a source of an apology when it comes to immigration stuff. So really interesting.
Again, not only the Latino Rebels crew, but Latinos, Puerto Ricans, particularly in social media, that mobilized. I mean, the guy was saying, I'm getting hate mail, I'm getting complaints, but the tennis club was getting complaints. The Republican Party in his county, there was some prominent Puerto Rican Republicans that even spoke up and said this cannot be tolerated. So I think this was a good mobilizing moment, and we coalesced to support these people because they didn't deserve that. There was no need for that. It was very disgusting. And so, I don't want to say his name again. But we have to stay diligent. We've got to support each other. Look, we were lucky this was on video. It was lucky it was in a public place that there was some decorum. This wasn't, but easily someone could have got hurt, and someone, and our folks could have been further abused. So this just shows we have to continue to have each other's back.
Yeah.
Speaking of having someone's back, yes, LB.
I was about to say, Ray, I didn't want to leave here because I know you have a little more political bonchinche to tell our folks.
Let's see what I got in my stack.
What you got?
I mean, you see what I got. Open up the bowl skin here. We're not just East Coast centric here. We cover the whole gamut, coast to coast. And so I wanted to shout out Nuri Martinez, Elbert. Nuri Martinez is the newly elected, not only city councilwoman in Los Angeles, president of city council. In January, she will become the first Latina to ever be the city council president of the great city of the Angels. And we're very proud of her. And what's very interesting, if you see this trend, you think about Rosso Romero, newly elected mayor of Tucson, Arizona.
Yep.
And Nuri Martinez, these are women not only are strong Latinas, pioneers, trailblazers, but these are women building their political careers and building their political futures on the policies of pushing climate change on local level, because we're not getting any movement on federal level. So Nuri is Councilwoman Martinez, Council President Martinez is pushing a Los Angeles Green New Deal. That's going to be a big part of her platform. Nuri got a lot of street nerve. She made a comment at her inauguration or her election to this that she said, well, she's from the San Fernando Valley part of LA. She said, my neighborhood, they don't go around in those rented scooters. And don't, she's hood. She got a little edge to her, and has a great personal story. So I reached out to a great friend of the show, Brenda Gonzalez, of course. With the Mostas of the Tamarindo podcast, great friends. Yeah. And I said, Brenda, you're our West Coast correspondent. You got your ear to the street. Tell us a little bit about Nuri. So I wanted to let people know. Brenda wanted to let people know that Nuri Martinez is a longtime advocate for electing more Latinas, supporting others, lifting others up. With her support for Hispanas, Organized for Political Equity, HOPE, a fantastic California organization celebrating 30 years. Actually, their gala is as we speak, LB. The red carpet is happening now.
You got to get some video footage.
And so tonight's obviously going to be a big celebration. She was part of their alumni class from 18 years ago. And look at all the wonderful things that Nuri Martinez has done. So leadership, mentorship, working together, supporting each other is a big part of this story. So much respect and congratulations, felicidades to the newly minted president of the Los Angeles City Council, Nuri Martinez. I'm very excited about her appointment to that position.
Great. Well, look, It seems like everyone in my household is getting ready to go to sleep. So we might be needing to wrap it off. But
no. We're going to wrap this up.
But I know that there's also, there's also a lot of things going on in terms of this week. Yeah. We've got debates in the cut. We've got the big deadline
December 20th,
right?
And by the way, a few campaigns have shown interest in bringing on the surrogates for our post-game show. So I want people to look out for that.
December might be a gift. No?
Yeah. So I think look. I mean, on the obviously the impeachment stuff is moving along really quickly. The things you want to look out for are in these deadlines coming up in the last few days. It's very unlikely that we'll have any minority representation for the December 20th debate. How does that impact some of these other candidates? Do we see in the coming weeks a Booker or a Castro step aside? And so that's something that we have to be very watchful for. Of course, I'm personally supporting Castro, so I want people to support him and help him get onto stage for the upcoming debates. And then look, I mean, big picture, where's this electorate going to go? It's most likely we'll have a split decision. But kind of more on the progressive end with New Hampshire and Iowa. What do black folks decide to pivot in South Carolina? Do minority voters revolt against this? Do minority voters go with what their kids are doing, which is going with Bernie? Or do they keep it safe and Biden squeaks in his nomination? So this could go a few different ways.
This is, honestly, we're going to look at it.
But it's in our hands is what I'm trying to tell people. It's our decision ultimately if we want it to be, if we own it.
Well, and I think this, and again, I think this is for our next show, but the truth is that, we live in an age where perception controls so much. And yet we have to remember, like you said, that we can come out. Right. And that the media doesn't decide. The polls, yes, affect people. But at the end of the day, the polls are a reflection ultimately of who's talking on the phone. And if someone has called you to ask your opinion, then you're not reflected in the poll. And so you got to think about like how many other people didn't get asked either. Right. And so you can't let a poll determine whether or not you're going to walk out and vote or to activate or to do anything. Right. And so it's going to be real interesting. We're going to have a good laugh next year when next year at this time we press the rewind button and figure out what's happened in terms of like all these candidates, all this stuff like that. Because looking at this in terms of December, we're kind of on the cusp of a real generation changing, impacting election, real changing, impacting year, really, when you think about it.
No question. Let people know where they can check out the latest episode of the Que Lo Que podcast, brother. The spot for Dominican conversation online.
Well, look, we're this week we're talking to Jasmeli Jackson, who is the co-owner of Típico Dominicano, one of the oldest Dominican restaurants in Miami. Also a great spot to get some real good food. Maybe hear a little bachatita, on Thursday. Maybe merengue, peripio, hipiao, some reggaeton on a Saturday night. They got a great Sunday night, for example. Like they open up, basically do brunch, and then at 11 o'clock, as Jasmeli says, they kick out the kids. And then they continue to party on, right? So it's a very great, funny, fun atmosphere. So we have a good conversation with her. But you can check it all out at queloquepodcast.com, queloquepodcast.com, or you can follow us on social media on Twitter and Instagram at queloquepod, at queloquepod. So sign up for our newsletter, like the Facebook page, and if you want to even, you could even donate, right? But at the end of the day, we've had a blast doing it. And we've got a couple of really cool guests coming up. So I won't say too much because I'll leave the bonchincha to you,
Well, I'll just say this, LB, that I was able to share when I was in Milwaukee with the team of a very, very, very prominent Dominican American, and they were very interested in the California. So we'll see. But I'll leave it at that. They were down. They were actually down with both shows. But hey, we're in the process of transitioning the Ray Latino Talk Show brand to the translation brand. So, but in the meantime, you can still follow, download, subscribe anywhere you find Ray's Latino Talk, including on YouTube at Ray's Podcast, Twitter at Ray's Podcast, Instagram at Ray's Latino Talk. But in the coming weeks, you're going to see the branding change to the family translation full force. So we're really excited, but keep the conversation going. Email us. I know people like this conversation. Email us at podcastraise@gmail.com. That's podcastraise@gmail.com. And let us know what you think. Have ideas for the show. We got a lot of people in the queue to come on the show. Albie, did anyone else comment or any other? I know Ms. Shepard said a word, or want to make sure we shout out anyone that had a contribution.
Yeah, no, I think definitely. I think we had some really good conversations in terms of people doing, especially on Twitter and in terms of people, in terms of like you said, mentioned definitely Samantha Shepard brought up a really good point about in terms of the denial of tenure being a part of form of institutional violence, which is something I think that our friend Cristina Vega, I'm sure will, like that would be a great topic of conversation for them to talk about. Would love to get, some of Samantha's thoughts more about that. Shout out to all the folks who kind of joined up in. I mean, we had a lot of people, especially on to listen to Dr. Jaime. And I'm sure we'll have her soon, right? We'll have her soon, right? So we can talk a little bit more. I really want to hear more about in terms of her, the work she's working, her real work, right? And the work she's doing around Latino media. I mean, really, really, really cool work she's doing,
Brother, appreciate you. I know let's get back to reality here, but appreciate everyone that's engaged in the Fountain Translation experience, whether it's at WPPMLP 106.5 FM, the podcast, YouTube, the live show. We appreciate you guys and have a fantastic weekend. Get all your shopping done. You only got a couple more weeks till Christmas. Peace, familia.